Hello and welcome to episode 112 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is October 1st, 2018. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both of McFlugel.com. Show notes page for this episode will be McFlugel.com/112. You'll be able to find things that we talk about, as well as how to find our guest. And before we introduce him, just a quick shout out to LibertyMugs.com, where we sell libertarian-themed mugs. So go over there and check that out. So without any more delay, let's send it over to Slappy, and he's going to introduce our guest and our topic.
Thanks, Rollo. Thanks, everyone, for listening to the Rollo and Slappy Show. I'm Slappy Jones. Today we have a guest. Well, first off, a couple weeks ago, we talked about Bitcoin maximalization, or maximalists always throw those terms around. And I think they mean different things to different people, so we kind of explained what we think. And we threw out a challenge out there to say, if someone disagrees, please come on and talk. We'd love to hear another side. It seems like all the talk in this space is very loaded and a lot of personal attacks and stuff. And we kind of tried to avoid that here. And our friend Melissa at NotM3G on Twitter introduced us to Chris Pacia. He's a back-end developer of OpenBazaar. He is a real whiz on crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain, etc. And he disagrees. I don't want to speak for him, but as I know, disagrees with Bitcoin maximalization, whatever. So anyway, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We really appreciate your time tonight. So let's get into it. Rollo, do you want to explain in like 1 or 2 minutes, just kind of recap our episode from a couple weeks ago and state your case for Bitcoin?
Sure. So kind of in the nutshell is that the purpose of all of this is we're looking for government hard money, something we're trying to get away from this central banking system with the Federal Reserve and all that stuff that causes so many problems in the world. So Bitcoin represents an opportunity to do that. And so given that, as a maximalist, I think it's the best cryptocurrency out there for a number of reasons. I think it's got a good monetary policy, and also the security of the network is the strongest that there is. And so because of those reasons, it has the best chance of being money. And there can only be one money. And so we should be kind of supporting and putting our backing behind what has the best chance. And right now, that's Bitcoin. So that's where kind of the focus should be. That's where the development should be. That's where the putting the security, the hash power for the network should be. I think I think most maximalists would more or less agree with that. So, Chris, kind of tell us where you fall, if you think that we're completely wrong or got something right or a little bit wrong.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, I probably don't disagree with anything you just said there. So I don't know, maybe we could just end the show now.
Thanks for coming, man. We appreciate it.
But no, but in general, I think that that's a reasonable way of putting it. That Bitcoin has the best chance of all the cryptocurrencies out there, and you're right, it does have the most hashing power and the most security and that sort of stuff. And I agree with what you said about us wanting hard money and that sort of thing. I think where I kind of see Bitcoin maximalists kind of diverging from how you described it is there's a much more kind of militant wing of the maximalist group, which I almost is kind of what I sort of associate with maximalism, where it's kind of the everything but Bitcoin is a scam type crowd. What else is it? Like Bitcoin is the only one that has any chance of surviving long term. I think the way that you put it is a good way of phrasing it is that Bitcoin has the best chance. But the kind of maximalist viewpoint, the way I see it, is that nothing else has any chance at all, that there's like zero chance for everything else. And I certainly don't agree with that. Even if you kind of look at the markets, I think that even Bitcoin I think just technically speaking might be a little bit overvalued relative to other coins, in my opinion. But even if you just kind of look at where the market is today, Bitcoin has about 50% market cap relative to all the other coins, suggesting that, maybe investors are giving it like a 50-50 chance of being like the coin or the big one, long term, which is fairly reasonable. I'd say that that's kind of a reasonable way of looking at it. But, the Bitcoin maximalist view, I think, would say that Bitcoin's undervalued, that it should have 100% market cap because everything else is basically like a scam and couldn't possibly, have any value long term or couldn't possibly challenge Bitcoin long term. And that's probably the bigger part that I disagree with.
Yeah, and to throw you some red meat on this, I actually do kind of feel that way too. It's when you just go out and say, because Slappy and I have talked kind of at length about this, when you just say, well, everything else is a scam.
That annoys the hell out of me.
Yeah, it doesn't come out very well. So I think a better way, and even this is contentious, is to call everything else kind of an attack on Bitcoin. And I don't mean that to be like,
it's a discussion on this too.
Yeah. And that sounds harsh. And I don't know if it should or shouldn't be, but, I guess
explain real quick why you would call it that.
Sure.
I'm sure it's nothing Chris hasn't heard before, but just put it in your words. I want to see what he would respond to that.
Yeah, so I don't mean an attack as something as necessarily that's, has to be this malicious thing like, I'm trying to take down Bitcoin. You could have good intentions, but be doing something that's a negative thing. Like how I said that there's only going to be one money, because there can only be one money. At least geographically, if not globally, that if you create an altcoin and you're saying that I don't want to necessarily compete with Bitcoin, I want to be a competing money, or even like Litecoin, how they kind of say they want to be the silver to Bitcoin's gold. That represents an attack, because not necessarily because they're trying to destroy Bitcoin, but they're preventing it from becoming money more quickly than it would otherwise. And the sooner we get sound government hard money, the better the world will be.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree. I think what I would say, I do work on. I guess primarily in my spare time, the main one that I work on is Bitcoin Cash. And I would say like my motivations for that is, I certainly don't want to hold up, like monetization of cryptocurrency and that sort of thing. But for me, it's kind of more about making sure we have the right foundation underneath of us, for when we get to the point where it's going to start growing big. And that's kind of why I work on it. In that sense, I don't know. I still feel like it's kind of early that I don't know if I would be at this point saying that Bitcoin or even Bitcoin Cash, I'm more than willing to say Bitcoin Cash might be a total flop as well. It could be something else that hasn't been invented yet that ends up being like the one that has all the properties that we want it to have. Because where things stand today, most cryptocurrencies, certainly Bitcoin Cash included, there's a lot of properties that we'd like it to have, but it doesn't have, right? So, privacy being a big one, scalability, right? I know there's a big debate between kind of on-chain, off-chain scalability, but you could have technical innovations that come along that just kind of render like the Lightning Network, for example, completely obsolete if someone were to get something like ZK snarks working on, or recursive snarks working on a blockchain for validating blocks. Something like that could just completely, make the existing technology obsolete. So I don't know if I'm willing to say like this is it. Like this is the technology that's going to stand the test of time. That there may be other stuff that come along. And I probably won't say that until we get in a bunch of these areas. Scalability, privacy, proof of work might be another one. The issues surrounding energy consumption. Until we get things like this completely solved and working really, really well, I'm probably still going to always hold the view that there might be something better coming along down the road.
Oh yeah, and I don't want it to mean that, you know, I especially, you know, I'm not really that technical with it, that I have the hubris to say that there absolutely will be nothing else. But what would you say? Because I guess the main response from the maximalist response to that would be, okay, well, yeah, there is definitely going to be advancements, innovations, and everything. And I mean, I don't believe that the Lightning Network is the end all be all. It might be, but you know, like you said, it's that the space is so young and new, and there's so much going on. Who knows what's going to come out, you know, in 6 months. So what would you say that? Okay, well, there with these innovations coming on, why not just apply those innovations to the most secure network? Or you know, it's all well and good if Coin XYZ comes up with this solution, but Bitcoin's just going to kind of take it anyway. So why do that extra step of programming it on a different coin?
Yeah, so that was more or less my view. I held up through maybe a couple years ago. So if you asked me, certainly when I kind of was first getting into Bitcoin and even up through just the last few years, why I would think that there was other coins had like a slim chance of like passing Bitcoin and kind of taking it over. It's because it's all open source, right? The other coins are open source, Bitcoin's open source. That if something proves to work well, that Bitcoin could conceivably just kind of incorporate that change or that upgrade into its own system. And then you have the question, like, why would anyone use the other one when, you know, the coin that has all the market share and the network effect and everything has the same, you know, the same feature as well. And so when people would tell me, you know, that, you know, Bitcoin's going to be like the MySpace of cryptocurrency, you know, that would be my response, like that it's, you know, they can just fold in any of these changes. But I think what really kind of changed for me was I really started questioning whether that's true. And we saw the Bitcoin community took a really hard turn starting around, really starting as early as maybe like 2015, but going, I'd say certainly picked up big time last year with the debate, and in 2016 with this whole scaling debate, where some part of the Bitcoin community started saying no, that the protocol needs to be completely locked in and never change, and that you know, and like I have this slide I'm looking at from Giacomo's presentation he gave recently, where he says any attempt to change Bitcoin is a scam, right? So like they really dug in deep, and the community did, or at least a part of the community dug in deep, saying Bitcoin must never ever be changed, that it's basically 2009 tech forever, that Bitcoin was essentially perfect when it came out in 2009, maybe minus SegWit. And then, you know, and now we should never be changing it. And so we saw, now on one hand, you want something to be, there's an antagonism here, because you don't want money to be relatively easy to change. But on the flip side, we're dealing with technology in a space where things change rapidly, like very fast. And so you don't want something to be completely rigid, that it can't change at all, but you also don't want it to be able to be changed, you know, at people's whims. But it seems kind of like a lot of people in the Bitcoin community went with the, well, it must never ever change philosophy. And this was the narrative that was kind of pushed by the core developers, it was pushed by their supporters. And they drove out a lot of people from the community, like myself, who think that, hey, there's some properties of Bitcoin that we would like to see change. Not like, for example, not the 21 coin limit or this sort of stuff, but there are like block size limit and other scalability properties related to scalability and stuff. And so it became apparent that it was not changing, right? And it was like hardened and resistant to change. And I remember, you know, them calling us, like when we're working on like SegWit 2x, like we're like it's a corporate takeover of Bitcoin, right? And this sort of stuff was kind of the narrative that was pushed. It wasn't a corporate takeover, but it was like just these kind of narratives that were sort of pushed out there, and it just makes it really makes me think, well, maybe Bitcoin could be the MySpace of cryptocurrency, right? If maybe some other one comes along and that has better features, and then Bitcoin, the community is convinced that it was more or less perfect in 2009, and that any attempt to change Bitcoin is a scam, and so it just never incorporates those new features and gets passed up because of that. Now, I don't know if that hasn't really been tested, right? Because we haven't really seen any other cryptocurrencies come out with like features that just blow Bitcoin out of the water. But I mean, that really makes me skeptical of my initial claim that Bitcoin could just incorporate these new features into it.
Gotcha. So I guess that leads to the hard fork versus the soft fork question. So what's your appetite for hard forking? Like, I don't know if that's too broad of a question, but
no. I think my view, and I think the view of many other developers on pretty much every other cryptocurrency besides Bitcoin, is that you're going to have to do hard forks from time to time to upgrade the software, to keep it relevant, that sort of stuff. I do think it's probably best to try and get the hard forks out of the way early while it's still relatively small. And because it's going to be, the bigger things get, the harder it becomes to do these type of hard forks. And you certainly don't want to be at like global scale and then trying to do some kind of controversial, hard fork or something like that. So I think you kind of, there's that, again, it goes back, there's this trade-off between the desire to want to like make it so it's really difficult to change, and then desire to want to make it so that you can get in the changes necessary so that you can get it to the point where you want it to be. So I know in Bitcoin Cash, the developers have been doing semi-annual hard forks, like every 6 months, which is a really aggressive schedule. And it hasn't exactly been without controversy, right? There's, in fact, coming up with this November hard fork, there's a massive amount of controversy surrounding it. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I think that's really unfortunate. That's the negative or the downside of it. The positive side of it is we have been able to make some changes to Bitcoin Cash that I think have been beneficial. And, if we can, at some point, we're going to have to like cut down on the number of hard forks and how we do them and the frequency, and come up with some kind of better process. But I think the thinking has been up to this point is it's still relatively small, certainly small compared to Bitcoin proper, and might as well kind of get the hard stuff out of the way as early as possible.
Okay, what would you say to saying that even doing the hard forks, obviously if it means that the network is just going to die, I think would hope it would be fairly uncontroversial to do a hard fork to fix it in that situation.
Yeah.
But for the less terrible consequence situations, do you think that having even really any sort of appetite for hard forking disincentivizes coming up with solutions other ways that might be better in the long term? Because with hard forks come with some risk. Even not assuming that anyone's trying to do anything nefarious, just, as we saw with this recent Bitcoin inflation bug, that sometimes people just screw up and then someone doesn't catch it. So given that risk there, is it causing more harm than good in the long run to have the hard forks as opposed to figuring out ways to soft fork and just having other solutions?
Well, I mean, as it relates to the block size, so one of the arguments was made is that, like, if you don't increase the block size, this will incentivize people to come up with alternatives. I don't know if I fully kind of agree with that, because, I mean, certainly there's incentives to, like, write and code the alternatives. I think if, let's say, we just increase the block size and to, 2 megabytes or 8 megabytes or something like that on the Bitcoin network, probably far fewer people would have been willing to work on the Lightning Network. Now, with that being said, things like the Lightning Network, I think we can gauge how well they're likely to succeed, in advance. So it's not, So in other words, like the ideas don't really need a whole lot of incentivizing, right? It's what the incentive is to do the hard work to write the code. But just thinking about it and putting out the ideas, that comes out. We're getting, ideas coming out pretty heavily. And I'm not sure that, in the case of let's say, if we had, for example, an 8 megabyte block size, I'm pretty sure like the Lightning Network paper would still have been published, right? I don't think that only happened because that the publishing only happened because we had a 1 megabyte limit at the time. And right. I think the same thing I would say with any other potential scaling technologies is, I think at least from a research perspective, I don't think we're disincentivizing the research. We might be disincentivizing some of the coding on it, but I think whether or not that's bad depends on, I guess, the strength of the particular solution that you're trying to incentivize. Mm-hmm. If that kind of makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, that I think that makes good sense. So, a couple questions I have, and I think I kind of know the answers to this. I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but just so we can ask, because I think it's. I guess I don't want it to seem like, especially talking to you so far, that it's not just it's either Bitcoin all or nothing, or let's have 8 billion altcoins out there. So, what are your thoughts on like the kind of the slogans like "tokenize the world" or "blockchain's not Bitcoin"?
Yeah, I mean, the use case that I'm most interested in is money. I mean, there are a couple other interesting potential use cases. I don't know, maybe like DNS or some of the smart contract type stuff, but I'm not sure that the blockchain based solution for these things is like 10 times better than what we currently have, right? Like the DNS system is not great, but I'm not sure that blockchain based DNS would be 10 times better. It might be, 1x better or 2x better or what, So I'm mostly kind of interested in like in the money aspect of it. And I don't know, the whole token stuff is, it's not as much up my alley. I do pay a little bit of attention to it in case there's, some interesting stuff coming out of it. But as of yet, it's, we haven't seen any of these other use cases take off either, right?
Right.
Ethereum's been out for quite a while, and the most popular thing built with it so far is the CryptoKitty stuff, right? And so we haven't exactly seen any of these use cases blowing up. I mean, for that purpose, the use case of money hasn't blown up either. But I'm kind of more ideologically motivated to see money happen, more so than some of this other stuff.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place to pivot to kind of something a little bit different. You wrote, how long ago was that? Oh, it was 4 months ago. You wrote a response to a Jimmy Song piece about crypto Austrians and crypto Keynesians. As I said to you in the chat, I don't want to throw around those names with that. But you wrote about some ideas about how money comes about in that piece, in that response. So can you kind of go through how you think that whether it's Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency does end up becoming the money, kind of the steps that it has to go through?
Well, I think we want to see it get increased usage as a medium of exchange. And I think if I can gather my thoughts on this, one of the issues I have with the store of value kind of meme is that, how do I want to phrase it? What people are referring to as store of value, I see as kind of a form of speculation. Okay, that Bitcoin today does not make a very good store of value, right? It has these wild swings in value. It could, lose a bunch of your value overnight. If you invested in December of last year, you've lost a ton of value so far this year. So at this point in time, it's not a particularly good store of value. And so what people are speculating in is that at some point in the future, Bitcoin is going to have more usage. Okay. And to me, if that usage never materializes, the current value is going to go way down. Because to me, the value is based on that, or at least the way I see it, it's the speculation is we're speculating about future usage, and future usage as presumably as a medium of exchange, or for anything that any kind of reason people would have to demand Bitcoin. And if you take away that utility aspect of it, if you say like, okay, Bitcoin's just going to be, the usage is going to be store of value, to me that kind of starts to get into a little bit like Ponzi territory, where you're saying the people who invested in Bitcoin today, the only way they can earn a return on their investment is if they attract even more investors into Bitcoin in the future. And the only way those future investors can earn a return on their investment is if they can attract even more investors into it in the future. And so you just need this like perpetual increase in the number of speculators in order to sustain the value. So at the end of the day, to me, Bitcoin, in order for the asset to sustain its value, it needs to have utility. And ultimately the speculation needs to be rooted in speculation about utility, not speculation about future speculation. And I kind of took offense to Jimmy's song with he's kind of saying that people who, want to see Bitcoin used as a medium of exchange, he's kind of equating us to like Keynesians who want spending, right? And that's not what we're arguing at all. It's that we're saying that the asset needs to have utility and needs to be demanded for the utility that it provides in order to sustain its value, and to have an asset where it's only speculation and not utility is kind of like a bubble waiting to burst, as it seems to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me figure out. Sorry, I have a cat that every episode now likes to come up and chew on the wire. So I'm trying to block him right now. So, okay. In that kind of vein, so if I'm sorry, I had lost. Thanks a lot, Garam. While I'm
talking about having utility in the coin.
Yeah. Okay.
Utility. Yeah. So that there is a reason to want to use it, want to buy it.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go with. Thanks. So if it escaped me again. So this is terrible. But what incentivizes someone to get rid of, not get rid of it, but to spend it? I understand. I think I understand what you're saying is you want to have the use case of being used as a medium of exchange, so that it brings up.
Yeah, I mean, if I know I can go use Bitcoin to buy coffee, I might, I would want to get more of it because I can spend it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that, like, at the end of the day, you don't want the only place that demand is coming from being from speculators, because to sustain that, you need a perpetual increase in speculators to drive up the price. But what you can have, like, if you take, I don't know, let's say barrels of oil, right? Barrels of oil, the vast majority of the demand for oil comes from people who are buying it to use it, right? That they have a demand and a need for oil, and they're buying it and they're using it. Now, separately to that demand from the users, there is a group of speculators who might say, hey, I think a barrel of oil is going to be 10% higher next year, and so it makes sense for me to, buy the oil, put it in storage, and then, a year later, if it is 10% higher, I can take it out of storage and sell it. But the person you're selling it to is someone who wants to use it, right? I mean, you might, in practice, you could be selling it to another speculator, but the point is, you can't. If it was only speculators, that wouldn't be sustainable, right? Like, imagine that some substitute for oil came about that made oil as an energy source obsolete. It wouldn't be the case that you could just take your barrel of oil that you've been hodling and take it out of storage, and just sell it and continue selling it, right? Because people would no longer have a need for oil because they're not using it for anything. So the only person you could try and sell it to would be another speculator. But what's he speculating about, right? The market for oil has gone away. So why would anyone, continue to speculate and pay a big price for that barrel of oil? So there needs to be some kind of end user demand for assets. Gold, I think, is somewhat the same way. If to justify that kind of speculation, I think is my point.
Okay. So when it's, I guess the comeback would be that, the speculation is not that that it's gonna be money and that it's gonna replace, all other money or whatever. So
yeah, and I don't want to say that I think that Bitcoin is purely speculation today, but
right.
The point I think that Jimmy was, they're arguing about is that people who, again, this kind of goes back into like this maximalist view that like Bitcoin, what do you do with Bitcoin? You hodl it, right, or hodl, whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of like the primary use case that they're pushing. In fact, it was on that same slide that Giacomo had that says, any attempt to try and get people to spend Bitcoin is a scam, right? So it's this notion that Bitcoin's for hodling and that's it. And to me, that doesn't strike me as a sustainable way to build value.
Right. So if it is expected, because regardless of what coin it is, or have the expectation or speculating that it is going to be money, that means it's going to be, well, presumably would be, way more valuable at that point than it is today. So, how do you convince people? Well, I guess there's two sides of it. There's the convincing people who think that to say that it's better to spend it and not have that future value, and then also for people to accept it because it isn't that great of a store of value yet.
Yeah. So you said, like, how do you convince people to spend something that's like going up in value?
Well, it's the expectation. If they're speculating that it's going to be money eventually, that it's going to. The price today might jump up to $50,000 and drop down to $3,000 a year later, but the expectation is eventually it would be money, and so whatever it's doing in the noise right now is not going to matter.
Yeah. So to the extent that I'm not saying that people who are holding Bitcoin today are doing the wrong thing, but what you're kind of alluding to is that at some point, if it's money in the future, presumably people are trading it at some point in the future, right?
Right.
I'm not sure that, like, from what I get from people like Jimmy Song and Giacomo and other maximalists, is almost like they almost don't envision a future where people are actually spending it, right? It's the future is more hodling, and that's where I'm all for speculating that in the future Bitcoin's going to be widely used as money, but I'd like to see that wide use as money, not just wide use for hodling. In terms of how do you why would someone spend it, or if at this point in time or going up. It was funny. It was Fred Wilson. He's a big shot investor. He's one of the investors in our company. He made a blog post saying, what did he say? At this point, you can't keep spending something that goes up as much as Bitcoin has, so I don't spend it anymore. I just hold it, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of wrote a response to him, and I'm like, you could pretty much make that same argument about anything that you have. So like, what did I think I used as an example was, you could say, let's say you have $250 worth of Bitcoin, and you could say, well, why would I go out and spend that $250 worth of Bitcoin on groceries? It, would make no sense because Bitcoin's skyrocketing in value. But then my response would be, well, why spend $250 on groceries either if Bitcoin's skyrocketing in value? Because you could have easily just converted the $250 to Bitcoin at a small cost. So, it's the question: why spend any money when you have assets around you that are going up in value, and or why spend any value that you've accumulated? And the answer is that we have time preference, right? We have needs and wants in the present that we want to satisfy, and we're willing to spend some of our money to satisfy those wants in the present, even if it means foregoing the possibility of a bigger return in the future. So to me, it's spending, let's say, $250 on groceries is like the same as spending $250 worth of Bitcoin on groceries. In either case, it's an opportunity. I'm choosing to acquire groceries as opposed to increasing my stockpile of Bitcoin, right? So I don't think that's an unreasonable choice. So whenever you earn any income, a paycheck, you're going to put some money aside for savings, and you're going to spend the rest. And whether you save that in Bitcoin or something else, I don't think you can say, well, I can't buy groceries this week because Bitcoin's going up in value. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess you could spend, if you want to appeal to Thier's law and say, well, I want to get rid of the thing that's less valuable, your dollars. Because if you bought it with Bitcoin and then just replaced the Bitcoin with the $250 worth of Bitcoin you just spent by buying another $250, it really makes no difference.
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of Bitcoin over the years, but none of it, was, I have my Bitcoin that I save, and then, Bitcoin that I, usually, if I get paid in Bitcoin, sometimes I'll spend that or save part of it, spend some of it. And same thing with dollars. If I get paid in dollars, sometimes I, spend part of it and save part of it, But that's just kind of the way I look at it. You have your spending money, and then you have your saving money, and the asset that you're actually spending is not particularly of great importance.
Okay. Slappy, did you have any? I don't want to dominate.
Yeah, no, go ahead. If you have more questions to ask, I'm listening and taking it all in.
Yeah, that's kind of.
If not, well, we appreciate your time, but we want to give you a chance to, for our free market success story, plug your or tell us about Open Bazaar and how that works.
Yeah, so Open Bazaar is it's an e-commerce platform, kind of a little bit like eBay, but it works as a peer-to-peer application. So you can kind of think under the hood, it works a little bit more like BitTorrent or other peer-to-peer applications. Technically, it uses something called IPFS, which is kind of a souped-up BitTorrent type protocol. And, the goal is to allow people to buy and sell and trade whatever they want without someone telling them, no, they're not allowed to do that, right? Because there's plenty of items that people would like to sell on eBay that they're just simply not allowed to. Or, governments don't want you to sell it for one reason or another. And so this is, the goal of the platform is to have this kind of like free trade space on the internet where people can trade with each other and, without anyone having any kind of say. It's a pretty big undertaking. It's in its current form, it's working reasonably well, but it's not at this point not completely like feature parity with, let's say, eBay or Etsy or something like this. And so that's kind of what we're working on getting towards. We're also kind of trying to get it on the web and on mobile devices and that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, is that live? Like, can people use that now?
Yeah, you can use it now. There's a desktop application that you can download from openbazaar.org. If you go to openbazaar.com, there's a little like just web portal where you can kind of view stuff, but you can't like make any purchases or anything on openbazaar.com yet. But that's something we're kind of working on. But it's primarily right now a desktop application, and we're working on getting it on other platforms.
Nice. That's awesome. We'll put a link to that in the show notes page. Also, where can people find you online if you want people to find you?
Yeah, you can. Probably Twitter is probably the best place. It's just my name at Chris Pacia. Yeah, I'm around in some Telegram groups on Reddit and on Facebook if people dig for me.
Awesome. Do you have anything else that kind of we didn't cover that you think is worth noting about maximalism or Bitcoin or anything?
I don't know. I think that kind of covers the. Yeah, I think we mostly got it all. I know the maximalists have a lot of very specific critiques of, like, let's say Bitcoin Cash,
right,
in particular, but I don't know if that necessarily. That's more of like a Bitcoin Cash discussion, I guess, probably, rather than a pure maximalist thing. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we know how those things go. Not that we couldn't have a fun conversation there, but I mean, I think we're kind of running out of time anyway.
Yeah, no, I thought that was great, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. That was good. I learned a little bit.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So quick wrap up, show notes page again is mcflugel.com/112. We'll link to the article we were talking about that Chris wrote, as well as how to find him on Twitter and Open Bazaar. And check out libertymugs.com. I think I'm finally going to put up that tractor mug that I realized I
snuck it in.
Yeah, I didn't forget.
Snuck it in.
Also on the show notes page, find us on all the podcatcher, Stitcher, iTunes. We've got a YouTube if you prefer to listen to podcasts there. And also check out the email newsletter. And if you sign up there, you'll get a discount over at libertymugs.com. So, all right, Chris, again, thanks for joining us. We'd love to have you on again sometime.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Peace.
All right. I guess.